Councillor Kim Snape is the Vice Chair. Please note this is a Teams meeting. It is being recorded, IT, yeah, and stream will also be uploaded to YouTube after the meeting. For each item, I will invite members to use the raise hand function on Teams to make any comments to ensure each member has the opportunity to speak and they are not speaking over each other. Please mute your microphone feed when not speaking. If the technology fails, I will adjourn the meeting for a few minutes to try and resolve the issue. Or if that's not possible, a new date and time will be organised. Please, can I ask you, Ruth, to confirm who's present on the call before we begin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in front of me I have Carolyn Williams, County Councillor Hasina Khan, Chris Moyster, Councillor Beaver, Councillor France, Councillor Snape, Councillor Lennox, Councillor Holgate, Councillor Hargreaves, Craig Ainsworth, Graham, Parish Councillor Graham Ashworth, Parish Councillor Katrina Reid, Parish Councillor Kevin O'Donnell, Kerry Maguire, Parish Councillor Nicola Smith, a member of the public Mark Tebbott, sorry I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, Terry Dickinson, and a gentleman on a mobile phone who I'm not sure who his name is, but I shall find out after the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Ruth, I'm coming as councillor.
Sorry, I do apologise.
Right, thank you very much for that, Ruth. Welcome everybody. It's nice to have a meeting. I mean, it was the 15th of January before we had the last one. I know they're not the same when you can't be all in the chamber or a committee room, but here we are. This is what we've got to put up with for the moment. The minutes of the meeting of the 15th of January 2020 has anybody got any issues with them? And could I have a proposal, please?
I'll propose that there are two accounts of the last meeting, Chair. Aaron Beaver.
Councillor Beaver. A seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
That's
Laura Lennox.
Laura Lennox. Councillor Laura Lennox, yeah. I can realise your dulcet tones, Laura. Right, number 3 on the item is we've got Caroline Williams from Central Lancashire, who's a local planner coordinator, who's presenting an item which is on air quality update. Are you there, Caroline?
Good evening, Chair. Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm Carolyn Williams. So for those of you who don't know me or have not met me, I've met quite a number of you now. I joined the council last April, and my role is to deliver the Central Lancashire local plan, of which Chorley are part of. And I was asked to attend and present at this meeting tonight on what we're doing in regards to air quality. So I've put a little bit of a report together just to give a background to members as to, you know, how we monitor this, what the requirements, etc. are, and governance, because I wasn't sure the state of everybody's knowledge on this. So apologies if I am speaking of things you already know, but it was just to give you a bit more background. So am I okay, Chair, to go through the report?
You're fine, Caroline. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as you're all aware, the Council declared a climate emergency on the 19th of November last year, and this committed Chorley Council to delivering carbon neutrality by 2030. It's an ambitious target, and it's 20 years ahead of that of the UK. And to enable this, we do need to encourage a significant amount of behavioural change in our residents, how we behave, and as businesses, and how we support those businesses to become greener. And so one of the things that have concerned members and residents has been the level of developments in the borough over the past few years. And there is concern of poor air quality, which I do address later in the report. But obviously, recent circumstances have made us a lot more aware of the air around us and the places that we can spend time. So I think this is a real opportunity now for us to do something and have some proper change. So the national policy around air quality is changing, and when I wrote the report last week, we were at the second reading, but I've just been looking today, and we have now got to the committee stage of the Environment Bill. So it is progressing, and I presume you've probably all seen the news reports today of Boris's announcements on changes to gas in homes and ban on petrol and diesel cars by 2030 and the encouragement of more renewable energy. So there are step changes that are happening, and they will feed down to what we do locally. But again, the national policy and the guidelines that we will have to comply with will come through a national air quality strategy, which the Environment Bill is going to introduce. And it will be the second stage of the Environment Bill, not what's currently presented. So what's currently going through sets out what we will deliver as a country, and then the more detailed aspects will come through there. So it'll be a little bit of time yet before we get a national air strategy, but that will set binding targets for the local authority. So at the moment, we do monitor air quality across the area, as you're aware, and the process we use is passive diffusion tubes, and they are very small tubes, probably a couple of inches long, and they're at specific locations, and they are recorded in the air quality monitoring report, which is produced annually by the EHO team at Chorley. And as I say, there are currently no indications of breaches of the objectives that we have to monitor. So we are actually clear of any air quality management areas, but that may well change depending on what targets come through nationally and what changes are introduced. But to give you an understanding of the targets that we're monitoring, I did include those, and it also includes the targets that we have to achieve. So in some cases, we may well be compliant, but future targets may become more ambitious. And that's what we want to make sure, we are sticking to achieving and delivering those changes. So I put you a little bit of facts in there about the current status and the concern I think that a lot of people have is around traffic congestion and a level of air quality that's attributed to that. So we do have the worst CO2 emissions across Lancashire, and that is mainly due to the fact that we have the M6 and the M61 going through the borough, and because of that there is significant pollution, but it is limited to those locations. There is obviously on the A roads as well, but it's not to a level that's actually causing us any specific issues. But we do monitor that, and we are looking at changing the locations where we monitor going forward. And a link to this is levels of PM2.5, and again, they are significant when you consider the road generation traffic. But again, we are looking to change those going forward. And if the environment strategy or the Environment Bill imposes new targets, that may well put us into a position where we're not compliant anymore. But Chorley as a council has decided to produce an air quality strategy, even though they don't have to. And this is because air quality is a corporate priority for the council, and budget has been allocated to help us improve and look at how we can monitor more and deliver change. And one of the ways we'll do that is through communicating better with members of the public and businesses and educating them on what we can do and how small changes can have a huge impact. And the local plan will be a big player in that. We're also looking at implementing measures through the council themselves and how the council can lead by example and change the way they run the business. So one thing you can do there, I've noted, is about moving to electric fleets, making buildings more energy efficient and things like that. And again, it's looking at how we can promote sustainable travel and sustainable movement around the borough, and working with partners like county and delivering areas like that. But a lot of those are long-term measures. So they will be something that we'll look to deliver, but it will be a long-term measure. So that's currently where we're at. And I say, if you're aware of what we're doing through the local plan, that is one of the key mechanisms of how we're going to be delivering those changes. But it will be probably a medium to longer term fix and then a short term solution, and one we do need members like yourselves to help push and back.
Thank you, Caroline. Just a quick question from myself. Did you notice a significant difference in the air quality when we had the close down from March to July? Is it possible to comment on that or not?
So we haven't got this year's results yet, but when I've talked to the air quality officers previously, they always note that during school holidays, there is a significant drop in CO2 emissions. So yes, you will notice a change there. But even though we are reducing traffic on the roads, as a result of COVID, there is actually an increase in traffic because of or more recently since people have gone back to work as a result of public transport being something that people aren't being encouraged to use. So actually, although a short-term gain was probably seen, I think it's gone back to those levels, if not higher. And reading some reports from their quality recently, they've shown that specifically around the city centres and Manchester being one, that actually the air quality levels have got back to what they were pre-COVID. And that's mainly, I think, attributed to the fact that people aren't using public transport at the moment.
Thank you. I've got 4 raised hands. I've got Steve, Terry, Kevin and Aaron at the present moment. So Steve, if you'd like to start.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Caroline, for the introductory talk about where we're up to at the moment. I have a couple of questions. One relates to the capacity for testing the air on an ongoing basis. I do know that we've got some local residents in Chorley that are very keen and have been monitoring the air in their own way with different types of equipment to the type that we've got as a council. Is there a way in which we can embrace their enthusiasm to address and increase our capacity to monitor all types of air qualities? I believe one of the issues that isn't to do with diesel or petrol or hydrocarbons generally, but to do with tyre wear, and there's a lot of suspended particulates as a consequence of tyre coming off the rubber coming off the tyres onto the road and then being thrown up into the air, and that is something I'm not sure that we're monitoring, and so it would be nice to know if we could in the future. And the other thing is just a comment, really. Obviously, some of the most vulnerable people to pollution and are children, and there's been a number of things on TV showing the level of particulates and dangerous air qualities in and around schools. So I think it would be useful when we get to the policy stage and looking at solutions that we focus on their plight as our young residents of the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the first one, yes, we are aware that there are members of the public who do monitor, but because we can't quantify whether or how accurate that is, we can't really use that data. So unless it's using processes that we know and we can monitor and calibrate, you know, and then we know that they're compliant with what we measure, then we can't use that data. So as interesting as it is for them to do it, unless they're using systems that have been approved and are allowed to be used in monitoring such things, then and as much as we'd like to, we can't. Once the monitoring stations are in place, they set up themselves. So I know that they are looking at different locations where they can monitor. Yeah, your particulates matter is something that, you know, the PM 2.5, you know, it's something that's a real issue, and it's a very small fine particles, and they're the ones that get into the lungs and cause the nasty problems that we're aware of, and premature deaths, etc. So that is something that we really do want to get to the bottom of and deal with. And at the moment, we don't monitor them, but that's because nobody actually monitors that specifically here, and that is one of the requirements that's going to be coming through the Environment Bill. But we will need to invest heavily in some very decent kit to actually be able to do that. So we are looking at future funding rounds from DEFRA. So they used to release them every October, and you can bid, and you know, one of the things you can bid for is specific monitoring stations. And I know that those areas that have air quality issues tend to have them. So I think Preston's got one. There's a much bigger piece of kit than we have, and they can monitor a lot more. We are currently limited, but we are looking to think what we can monitor. And there is a climate change task group on the 10th of December, which some members are invited to. So again, if people from this meeting want to feed through ideas to me now, or send them to me after the meeting, you can find my email address in the Chorley address book. If not, it's just my name, carolyn.williams@chorley.gov.uk, and send any issues you've got and we can raise them at that session. So we are, as to what we should be monitoring and what changes you'd like to see. And I know the other thing about the most vulnerable, yes, again, that is something that we're aware of, and there are monitoring stations outside a number of the schools at the moment. So I was looking to see exactly where all our monitoring stations are, and I guess those areas where they are on main roads and there's schools on main roads, there are monitoring stations near them. But if there aren't, and that might be something that actually, when we're looking at where we should be monitoring and what we should be monitoring going forward, it might well be those locations that we want to focus on. So that's a point that I can take with me tonight for that task group we've got in December. But it will be, again, something the local plan is looking to address as well, and encouraging people to walk and drive less. And one of the big issues for schools, not those who are on main roads, but those that normally, is in fact the amount of parents that do continue to drive to take their children to school, because that's the easiest method to get them there. And we do want to try and design developments in the future so that it is a lot easier for people to not have to rely on their cars.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Just to say, I've also got Mark with his hand up now. I will come to you, Mark, in rotation. Your turn, Terry.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you for giving us the information about the motorway pollution ribbons. My question really is, well, your observations on the fact that the Botany Bay development, where they're building houses, they're also proposing to put industrial units. My understanding is that the vehicles that are likely to go to those industrial units are more likely to pollute than ordinary cars. What is the council's view on this?
So I'm aware they're currently doing a consultation exercise on there, and I'm not sure if they've engaged in a pre-app, because I don't think DM are actually running pre-apps at the moment because they're not able to. So I can't comment on what DM's point of view is. I know that if they have submitted an application and a change, then there will have been a requirement for air quality to be assessed as part of that application, and cumulative impacts as well. But what I can do is get Adele to come back to you on that from development management or whoever's dealing with that new application. Because I say it's not something I'm dealing with, so I can't specifically comment on what they're doing, but I know that there will be a requirement for them to look at what the existing air quality is and what the impact could be on that location.
Right. What I am concerned about is it will add to already a bad situation at the motorway changes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
So is it Councillor Dixon? Is it?
Thank you.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Dickinson.
Dickinson.
Terry
sorry.
Dickinson from EP.
No.
Aaron. Wheelton, sorry. Aaron.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Just
Chair.
let Adele know. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just one question. Will all this trying to get air quality include wood burning stoves that burn wood? Because Chorley at one time used to be a smokeless free zone, and it isn't now, and I just can't figure out what happened.
So you can require smoke-free zones, and one of the things, if you saw the issues and options, there's a section in there about wood-burning stoves, because I know it's a particular issue of members, and I wanted to make sure it was in there, and we do identify how it's probably the worst thing to have in your home. It's worse than, smoking, effectively. The damage to your health is appalling. So I don't think the education is out there. People look at it and think, oh, it's a lovely, warm, nice stove in my house. And actually, in those areas where it's required for heating and functionality, then, and there are alternatives that can be provided to those homes. And yes, those sites are a necessity for the wood burning stoves, but the amount of new developments that are coming forward and requiring them or building them in, I agree there are issues there. So we did ask questions about, do we want smoke emissions or clean air zones in Chorley? There are new legislations coming in about the type of wood you can burn and the type of stoves you can buy, and that will help. What we can't do, and we won't ever be able to do, is stop people chopping trees down in their back garden and burning them when they're wet, which causes a lot of the issues.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Evening, everyone. Kevin O'Donnell, Adlington Town Council. Carolyn, thanks for your chat, interesting. Just one thought occurred to me, with respect to fleet vehicles. There's a headlong dash for battery-powered electric vehicles, but I wondered if you have on your consideration, or if you haven't, put it on at some point in the future, the consideration of hydrogen-powered vehicles for fleet use, which is, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, a much greener alternative than battery-powered vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, we're not being specific about one. I think we just talked about electric being one that's an option at the moment for the council, and I think it's probably an easier one to deliver in the short term. I know that there are councils like Liverpool City Region are looking at hydrogen powered for their buses, but I don't think they've got it for anything else. But I think that's what they've also got investment in there. So it's not the cheapest system to put in place. But following today's announcement, it does look like they're looking for a town to lead on hydrogen, be a hydrogen test town. Yeah. So I saw there's quite a lot more about that, and I think, yeah, do you want to put ourselves forward for that one? Yes, I'll note that, Councillor Holgate. I did suggest this morning when I was discussing with officers, are totally going to put themselves forward for the hydrogen test town. I'm not sure what it requires yet, but we can definitely look down that to see what it is. So it's you know, hydrogen is definitely something that people are doing a lot more on, and there's a lot more information coming out of it. And I think public transport particularly, and large fleet vehicles where you can get the investment in because you're buying in bulk are probably quite useful ways of taking it forward.
Thank you.
Mark, would you like to come in now and ask a question of Caroline?
Hi, yes, my name is Mark Tevitt. I have a few questions about what you've presented this evening. NO2, since we have diffusion tubes, we can only take the average. How do you ensure that in Chorley we're not breaching the hourly mean statutory limit of 200 if you're only measuring the average?
I have to say that I'm not the HO that's required to do that monitoring, so I can get a direct answer to you there. I presume, yeah, that they do know that they're not monitoring, that there is that issue there, but I'm sure they are looking at how they monitor it and what the issues are. Can I take your contact details and I'll get the HO who's responsible for that to contact you directly with an answer? I won't want to give you a wrong answer and say they know exactly what they're doing, because there will be information in our air quality monitoring reports.
I have read the report, and as far as I'm aware, you only monitor the average. So I think you don't know if you're breaching the hourly average or not because you haven't got the equipment to monitor it. That's what I think the answer is going to be. But anyway, yeah, I would like to get confirmation on that.
Can I take your details?
I can pass them to you, Carolyn, after the meeting. I'll then make a note of all the queries and pass it to you afterwards. Okay.
Lovely, that's great.
Also, there seems to be a lot of the focus is on road traffic, but as the 2018 National Inventory states, wood burning is the largest single source of PM emissions at 38% of total emissions compared to road traffic at just 11%. So since we have no PM 2.5 monitoring in Chorley, I'm very concerned that we have no idea how bad the actual air quality is. And I actually have installed 4 monitors of my own. Okay, they're not reference quality monitors, but they're £200 a pop. So I spent £1,000 monitoring air pollution across the borough. And some of my monitors are coming in at an annual average of 15, which is 1.5 times what the World Health Organization recommend as the annual average. So I would suggest we do have quite a bad PM pollution. The thing with PM 2.5 pollution, it's very localized. It can be very localized. So you can have one monitor 500 meters away, we'll measure 3, but if you've got one next to wood burner that's just lit up, it's going to show 30. So it's ideally we could do with cheap but many PM monitors so we get a better idea of the spread of pollution across the borough. That's my main recommendation, but obviously they're not cheap. Depends on what the cheapest acceptable monitor we can use is, etc. What other question have we got? Oh yes, I noticed hydrogen was just mentioned. I don't know if the council's aware that anything combusted in air will emit NOx pollution, even hydrogen. So if you go to hydrogen boilers, you're not going to move away from the NOx emissions that gas boilers do. The only true zero emission, low carbon heating solution are heat pumps. And also, if the hydrogen is going to come from, if the hydrogen comes from low carbon energy, you need 3 times the amount of energy to travel the same distance as a battery electric car. I've been driving electric cars for 9 years now, so I know all the arguments about hydrogen versus electric inside out, and basically hydrogen is extremely inefficient, and most of the hydrogen will come from natural gas. I've got all the data, I've got all the maths, I can send you all the information. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark. I seem to have 3 more hands raised. Do you want to come back on that alone, Caroline, or do you want to take the questions and take them forward?
I mean, I can go back. I know in the PM255, as I said, we know that there's an issue about that level, and that's something the environment or the EHOs would like to monitor. But at the moment, we don't have a requirement to, and it is an expensive kit to do that. So they are things that I did say that we're going to be looking at different things that we can monitor, and it depends on how much funding we've got for this area that we can put in. But it is something that we are looking at what new areas we should be monitoring in air quality, and I will put that forward as one. But it's, I guess, as you say, it's an expensive process, and from wood burning stoves we can't currently monitor where they all are, and not everybody is doing the bad smoke, so to speak. There are people who are burning cleaner fuels. It's a hard thing to monitor, that one specifically.
You've got Mark's contact details, so you can exchange emails. That's fine. Now I seem to have. I've only got it down as Councillor V. Would you like to ask a question? Or Councillor Y, maybe? It's you, Yvonne. Right,
oh, good.
Okay,
I thought,
away.
well, I've got
I've
the
just
copy,
got
and anybody else named Councillor Y, got to be me. Just to go back to Mark's question, I recently attended a big expo on fuel and various sources of sort of heat, etc. One of the things that did come out, that the hydrogen obviously has been trialled in Leeds City Council. They did quite a big trial of that, and also these domestic hydrogen boxes in people's houses, these white boxes that actually were heating the homes, and actually there were fuel used domestically. But one of the things, the conclusion of it was you would need a peripheral of different fuels and different energy sources. So it wasn't really going to stick to just hydrogen, but possibly electric as well. And that goes for public transport on buses, etc., and trains, that they were looking at not just one source of energy, but they were looking at several sources of energy and really not homing into actually just supplying one. So that's helpful at all. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I've noted those points. Thank you, they're helpful, Yvonne.
Yeah. Terry and Kevin, do you want to come back, or do you need to lower your hands? You just press the hand function, Terry, and it should go back to blank. Kevin, yeah. If you just touch the hand function, that's it. So I don't seem to have anybody else. So thank you very much for that, Caroline. And we'll move on to item number 4, which is an item requested by Adlington Town Council, which is flooding issues. Is there anybody who wants to present that, or do you want me to just read the questions out? That's entirely up to.
Mr. Chairman, could I say a few words on it?
If you want to present it, Kevin, I've no problem with that. That's often the way.
Okay, thank you. I've just got a few words, just a bit of background. I'm sure there's flooding issues all over the borough, but in Lower Adlington, we've had repeated flooding over the last few years, and then 3 times this year. One family with a young child has had their property flooded 3 times. That's the garage. The house is luckily unaffected, but the problem is it's runoff from land nearby, and the land is largely owned by Chorley Borough Council. And Chorley Borough Council have responded on the day, the most recent occurrence, and have witnessed the problems, and I'm very glad of that they've actually seen the extent of the problem, because until you see it, it's very hard to believe. And they are running with the problem. United Utilities are also interested, because by my calculations, there are tens of thousands of cubic meters of water running into their foul water system for treatment. So I'm optimistic that they're going to put a lot of pressure on the powers that be, in this case, the people that make the decision, because it's costing them money at the end of the day. And that way we may get something done. Michael Forster of Chorley Borough Council is leading investigations on behalf of the council, as I understand it, and they're looking at the sources of the problem to try and establish a solution, and said they would take it to the appropriate committee, which may be the Making Space for Water committee. I'm not sure precisely on that. If that happens, I'm not optimistic about what might ultimately happen and how quickly it'll happen, but we're watching this space, and I'm happy Chorley are dealing with it, and I'm sure we're not the only borough in the area that have had these problems, but this one is particularly in Chorley Council's backyard to a large extent. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kevin. We do have a representative on that committee, which is Doug Cridland, but I've also got County Councillor Aldgate who'd like to reply to you.
Okay.
Steve?
Thank you, Chairman. Struggling a bit with the icons there. Anyway, I think I'm unmuted now. You can hear me, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You're fine, Steve.
Right. Okay. I think it's really useful that Carolyn's still here, because it seems to me that, runoff from fields, a lack of other areas to absorb water, especially during extreme weather events, is clearly an issue that needs resolving now, but it's one that does not need exasperating by inappropriate development, creating even greater speeds of runoff and less absorption areas. And it's equally as important and as relevant as it is to deal with that in the local plan development, as it is to deal with ensuring that we insist that what houses are built to a standard that is environmentally high, and therefore is not creating fuel poverty for families that can't afford to fuel their house, to heat their home, because of the expense. So I think it's an absolutely relevant and pertinent issue. It's one that we're having the same issues in Coppell. I'm a Coppell parish councillor, and it is runoff. You don't have to be have a commune that straddles a river any longer to have serious issues to do with flooding, and there are several ways in which we can deal with flooding in particularly vulnerable areas, in terms of presenting people with support to make adaptations to their properties, so that the air bricks that quite often the source, the access point for water when it's gets building up outside your home, you can get them so they've got shutters on them now, so you can close them off under those circumstances, and a means by which you can sandbags are particularly useless. They look good, but in effect, when you sandbag in your front door, you've got a problem. And you can get mechanisms that I lived in France in the foothills of the Montagne Noire, and when it rained there, boy did it rain. And they have the systems there, so that you've just got a shutter that just sits down either side of your door casing, and it gives you another 18 inches of protection immediately. So I think there are ways in which we need to access that type of intervention for individual properties that are particularly vulnerable and are constantly being flooded on a more than annual basis now. Thank you.
Right, Steve. Just before I go to you, Terry, I'm going to bring in Karen Maguire, who's the Senior Risk and Insurance Officer here at the council. Kerry, would you like to reply to Kevin? I'll bring you in then, Terry.
Thanks, Councillor France. Yeah, I think just to give you a bit of background, I work in emergency planning for Chorley Council. So I work in the shared services covering Chorley and South Ribble, and I liaise on a multi-agency footing with regards to the response to flooding. So not necessarily the day-to-day activity that the council will deliver, but just to reiterate what Councillor Holgate was saying, really, that sandbags are of very limited use to property level resilience, unless you're going to build like a wall with a number amount of sandbags and use plastic sheeting, etc. So it is really, if properties are suffering flooding, and it's something that's repeatedly happening to a property, it is more the flood resilience measures that these individual property owners need to be looking at. What I would say is that there has been previous flood grants available that people probably will be aware of, but they do only tend to be made available for a significant storm, and they tend to need to be named events. So the Met Office will name an impending storm, and then afterwards, if there's been significant flood into properties, the government will then say that they're going to release funds for these property level resilience grants. So it is few and far between, really, that they're on offer. But I would agree with Councillor Holgate that it does need to be more preventative measures for these properties if it is an ongoing risk of flooding. But if it's surface water runoff, I think it is getting down to the bottom of where the water's coming from, and ways to mitigate that risk, really.
Thank you, Kerry. Did you want to come in on a particular one? I noticed Kevin's got his hand up again to come back on that. Terry, did you want to come in with one? I assume it's Winds Lane.
It is Winds Lane. We have a development at Winds Lane, Prospect House, where the actual land profile has been considerably altered. And since it's been altered, it's caused flooding to cottages in Winds Lane. Now, when the council asked to go and see the site to monitor it, apparently they were refused permission. And the danger is the way the water is being channeled away from the land now, it's now taking down some of the walls, making them bulge on the road. What is the council's view on this? Why should somebody that owns a lot of property with plenty of money trample on the little man, the people who live in the cottages, because they've now been flooded twice as a result of this land development?
Thank you, Terry. Kerry, do you want to come back on that one? You probably need to get some information on that, do you?
Yeah, it's possibly not my area of expertise. The area that I work in is emergency planning, so it's more the significant risk of flooding and the response to the major incidents. So I suppose these individual property level flooding events, it is actually within the jurisdiction of Lancashire County Council as the lead flood risk authority. So although Chorley Council would look to assist residents where resources allow, the flood risk to properties it comes down to Lancashire County Council to investigate when flooding is occurring, to try and establish where the flooding is coming from. I suppose that each one of these incidents will need to be looked at independently from Chorley Council as to what remit they have to engage with the incident. The other side of things is that the council does engage with the Making Space for Water group. It has been a number of years since I've been involved with that work for Chorley or South Ribble Council, so I'm not overly familiar where they're at, but I know from a few years back when I was involved with it, they do tend to look at clusters of properties, just because the amount of flooding it happens on a regular basis for various different reasons. So they tend to look if it's 4 or 5 or more properties, then that will sort of move that cluster of properties up in the priority of the Making Space for Water group to actually have a look what's actually going on and what the cause of flooding is.
Thank you, Terry. As I said, Doug Cridland is our representative. Kevin, you wanted to come back with something for Kerry.
Can I just come back before you go on to?
Go on.
No flooding took place until this development happened. And it's simple logic, cause and effect. All our farmers can testify there was no flooding there. We now have flooding because of the way the land drainage has been done and the height of the land profile. So surely somebody somewhere is going to monitor this. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
I think one thing that can be looked at if it's off a reasonably new development, there is some statute under the Land Drainage Act, and I think at Chorley Council that sits within environmental health, but I'm not too sure. Because I don't work in that area, I'm not too sure what how much resource they have to actually deal with that situation. But I think it's definitely worth dropping maybe environmental health an email about it to see if they can either flag it with the local flood risk authority with LCC, or whether or not Chorley's environmental health have any recourse to identify if there's an issue to do with the land drainage at that site.
I'll do that for you, Terry, and we'll come back to you. Kevin.
Thank you. Just come back to Steve and Kerry. 5 years ago, storms Desmond and Eva triggered a lot of conditions, and we have fitted snorkel air vents to our air vent covers. We did get a grant to cover that cost, which we were very grateful for. That was under David Cameron's regime. So we're well aware of taking preventative measures. A neighbour in the field is at the moment constructing a field bund to make a small dam and create a lake, if you like, in the field. So we're doing all we reasonably can. As far as making space for a water meeting goes, I've tried to engage with that twice and singularly failed. I rang Emma Lane at LCC 2 weeks ago, and she said she would get someone to contact me, and it's been silent since. I'm afraid I don't have a lot of faith in making space for water and LCC. That's the end of my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kevin.
Chairman, can I come in on that, because I know Emma Lane and I know the sort of pressure she's under, but if you could email me at my steve.holgate@lancashire.gov.uk email address the details, I will get on the case there and make sure you get the appropriate response. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
I've got Julia now. Julia Berry, are you there, Julia?
Yeah, thanks very much for allowing me to speak. I just want to pick up on the Lancashire County Council's part, really. They just haven't got the capacity to deal with anything, apparently, in Coppell, not in Chorley anyway. We've had 4 storms since August affecting some properties on Preston Road in Coppell. And recently, we just had no response whatsoever from the flood risk or flood response. And they're now saying that they just haven't got the capacity to send specialist contractors in who are currently fully committed elsewhere in Lancashire, and they're actually putting the onus now back on residents to sort their own problems out, and they just haven't got the resilience, or they'll have to, but the thing is, it's a dereliction of responsibility of the flood authority at county at the moment, and I really worry about this, and I think this issue merits being forwarded to either our scrutiny committee or the appropriate committee to discuss this further. And like Steve makes a comment about future house building, the house building we've got has exacerbated the situation in quite a lot of areas throughout Chorley. And I know Kim, or if Margaret France was here, she'd be saying the same things about areas in the other side, on the other side of Chorley. So there's an issue about capacity at county. And actually, when you were talking about in Abington about flooding going into garages, unfortunately, they don't treat that as an emergency. Now, after the 4th storm you've had in Coppell since August, when the water levels are rising and are more fierce, and the water is coming to your backyard and into your garages, you expect to get a response. And the response was, well, if it goes in your kitchen or your living room, it's as blunt as that, really. it would then merit some call out of an officer, but that would take over 12 hours to respond. So early in September, I actually was so exasperated. I got on to Chorley Council, to the chief exec, and actually Street Scenes came out and did a bit of a welfare check with the residents, tried to ascertain what was going on and tried to reassure them. And obviously they witnessed themselves how bad it was. And I'm sure that just replicates really what happened in Adlington. And I'm just so grateful that the Chorley Council stepped up in that situation. But unfortunately, as a county councillor, I cannot say the same about my own council. And it's really, really worrying, really worrying. We're going into winter when you know, obviously COVID is exacerbating, you know, just compounding the problems. Something urgently needs to be done to address it so that we're prepared and ready, and to like I say, the stuff that can be done, if we can access some funding, that would be really, really great. I'm trying to encourage Coppell Parish Council or Coppell residents to set up their own flood action groups. So we need to, you know, get body people together just as a fighting force, really, to deal with something that we should be getting our response from. At the moment, like I say, I went for 2 weeks, then 3 weeks, with no answers at all. And I've had an apology and an explanation. And there are some dreadful things going on in Lancaster, Ribchester, you know, go to other parts of Lancashire. But this is it's becoming more and more common. Like I say, 4 storms since August, and absolutely no response at all. So very worrying indeed.
Thank you, Julia. I've now got Kim who'd like to speak. Then I think we'll bring this to a close. Anybody else? Anything? Because we really need to bring it to a close.
Sorry, I was on mute. Just to reiterate some of Julia's comments, really, sometimes it's quite disheartening as a county councillor when you're dealing with flooding issues and you sort of think that it's, you know, is it me that's not purposely getting anywhere with some of these things? But honestly, it's not. As far as we understand it, the team at Lancashire County Council has just been cut like there's no tomorrow. Basically, people being made redundant, people being swapped roles that don't have experience in that particular field. And then when you're faced with these issues that affect your county council division, you know, it's just, you know, people are prioritised in various different parts of the county, and there's no excuse for it, really. In terms of some of the comments that Terry's made, I mean, I'll give you a ring over the weekend, Terry, because I'd be interested in trying to tackle that. I mean, it's on the border of my county council division, so but it will affect people in Heapy, so we can have a chat about that. But all I would say to people is you've just got to be persistent with Lancashire County Council. You know, they are neglecting the duties as the lead flood authority, and there is no excuse for it. And I would like to see scrutiny, discuss it in Chorley, because at least we can try and hold them to account in some way, shape or form. I did have a question as well about the flood grants. Are there time constraints around some of these flood grants that the government put forward? Because I know there are people in Heath Charnock around Limbrick that are still waiting for these flood grants from the properties that got flooded a few years ago just off Back Lane. And I know that I think they've been told by various different people that there's nothing there for them anymore. And then the last point I just wanted to make, if flooding is pursued as an issue sort of through scrutiny or other routes through Chorley Council, I'd like us to look at the role that United Utilities plays as well. We have quite a significant issue in Heath Charnock where the River Yarra comes down from Rivington and the West Pennine Moors, and United Utilities won't entertain controlling the flow of the water and letting the water out slower rather than letting it out at such a consistent flow as they do at the moment, where when we get the heavy weather and the rain, a lot of the properties around Back Lane and Limbrick end up worrying that they're going to get flooded again, and that the back gardens and the kitchens are going to end up going floating down the River Yarra. And the bottom line is, you know, the River Yarra goes to one place, and that's Croston. And I can't seem to get an answer out of United Utilities as to as to why they won't entertain that. But I know that's not going to be dealt with tonight, but that's just a gripe for myself, basically. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kim. And yeah, I mean, we know Terry well enough, so we can get in contact with Terry. I'll just one more that who'd like to come forward. Mark, would you just like to keep it brief if you could? But
yeah, it's just a very quick thing.
Just have a quick word.
It's just a quick thing to say that do any of the councils, would they like to see any of my data I've collected on my PM monitors? I've got one in Charnock Heath, Adlington. I've got 2 in Chorley Town Centre and 1 in Brinskell. I can send you a link to the website so you can monitor the PM per levels in real time. And I've also got spreadsheets of historic data I can send you just as a reference to see how bad the actual or how good the air quality for as far as PM 2.5 is concerned. Yes, they're not reference monitors, but they are reasonably accurate. So I just thought I'd put that out there.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure somebody like Councillor Aldgate would be interested. Carrie, you wanted to come back on the issue?
Yes, Chair, thanks. It was just in response to Councillor Snape's comments about the flood grants. So if the event was the 2015 flooding, in which I think it was a significant amount of properties in Chorley that were eligible to the property level flood resilience grants, the people that would have had to have registered by a certain date, and then after which Chorley Council did advise anybody who was registered on the system as being eligible for a flood grant, they had to have had the works completed and the invoices, etc., back into the council by a certain date to have them paid. So I think if these individuals were registered with the council and eligible, I think they need to get back in touch with customer services. I think it would be just needs to be checking on an individual basis. If they flooded at the time but then didn't contact the council till much later, then unfortunately they wouldn't be eligible. They would have needed to have informed us by a certain date. I think the cut-off was March, and I know that Chorley did extend it on individual circumstances for a few others. But if they hadn't got in touch within like at least the first 6 months, it is very unlikely they would be eligible for them flood grants. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you. We'll move on. My next thing is overview and scrutiny task group, and I can relax now because my colleague and vice chair is going to lead on this one.
We find it on my agenda. Yeah, so everybody's seen sight of the papers. Basically, the council formed an overview and scrutiny task group in the last couple of months that I'm chairing to look at sustainable public transport in the borough. So everybody's seen sight of the scoping document that we formed in terms of some of the objectives that we're hoping to try and get out of it, some of the outcomes, terms of reference and so on. It's quite early days with it at the moment, but we kind of want to look at sort of, well, A, how we could sort of improve public transport in the borough, B, sort of how we can get, I mean, bottom line is how we can get more people using public transport in the borough. Some of those issues have already been spoken about earlier on tonight in terms of making it so that people are less reliant upon a car and other things, and looking at different forms of public transport. We've had discussions with Lancashire County Council. We had the cabinet member for transport last week that basically told us unless we get a combined authority, you know, we aren't really going to get anywhere with influencing public transport in the borough. But obviously it's a massive issue really, and we just wanted to raise it with the parish and town councils, and if people don't have any comments tonight, you know, or they can discuss it at the meetings and email it into democratic services, and just make sure that we're not missing everything. I mean, from a local perspective, you know, I represent sort of Chorley Released and over to Adlington Way, and we're having issues at the moment where our rail service has been cut to a 2-hourly service, which just isn't practical, particularly when we're in the realm of social distancing and people are trying to get to work in a safe way if they are able to go to work. And there are various different issues. I could go on about it all night, but just to listen to what you have to say, really, and make sure that we don't miss anything. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I know we had Keith in to the task group, and he said, in his opinion, the combined authority was the only game in town. But I've got Steve Aldgate, County Councillor Steve Aldgate, who wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, public transport. I mean, public transport appears in many different guises, and one of the guises, which one might think is not particularly environmentally friendly, is the taxi service and the private hire service that we have operating, and that we do have some influence over as a district council. In the task and finish group that preceded yours, Kimberly, there were some recommendations by the Green Agenda task group for Chorley's Green Agenda, suggesting that as a licensing authority, we should be finding ways of incentivising taxi operators and owners to move towards electric or at least dual fuel vehicles, not least because once again it's to do with an issue we've touched on earlier, which is air quality. We've got taxis that we license to drop off children at schools, so there's a risk area. They tend to accumulate in the town centre, so they're driving and operating out of the town centre where there's a lot of people shopping and what have you. So I think it would be really useful if your committee, I was going to make a written submission actually, but this gives me the opportunity to present it to you, not face to face obviously, but monitor to monitor. It would be really useful if your task group took up and reinforced the importance of our licensing department developing a strategy that would enable us as a council to get a bit ahead of the curve on this one, and ensure that public transport isn't actually endangering people's health in the form of polluting taxis and private hire vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. You've got your hand still raised. Kevin, did you want to say something on this?
Sorry, no, Mr. Chairman, I forgot to take it down. Beg your pardon.
Thank you, Kevin. That's fine. I don't think I've sorry, I'm muting myself. I don't think I've anybody else wanting to come back on that one. No. Right, we can move on. Question from members of the liaison and members of the public. I think we cover most of those most of the time, but if anybody's got a quick question, you're welcome. Otherwise, I'll assume we're all happy. Anything, Ruth? Nope. Wonderful. Items for future meetings, which is number 7. I mean, usually what happens with this is, I think most of you are used to the procedure. We go away and have a think about it, and if anybody's got any suggestions, please email them to Ruth, and we'll do our best. It's just a matter sometimes of getting hold of a relevant spokesperson or somebody who's knowledgeable on the particular subject, but if that's there, we always do our best to oblige. And then moving on to number 8, which is any urgent business. I do have one item actually, unusually, and this will be presented by Chris Moister, one of our directors.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Yeah, it's not really a full agenda item. It's more of a plea. The council have been approached in relation to the potential vaccination centre sites throughout the borough, and been asked to identify potential council facilities that can where such vaccination centres can be located. It did occur to us that the parish councils may have some suitable facilities or sites, and it's really just an invitation for the parishes to consider what they've got in their area and make any proposals through ourselves. So if you contact through Ruth, and we'll make sure that any proposals get through to the right location. We're not saying that every single option that is presented to us will be used, but obviously what we're doing is trying to get in a position where we'll have suitable centres in suitable locations. So it is really an options piece of work at the moment. So it's not necessarily for feeding back right now, but if you can feed back through Ruth, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, in these strange times, this is how it is, I guess. You know, we've got to be one step ahead of the curve. Now, I think that's everything now.
I think Yvonne's got her hand up.
Thank you. Thank
you. Yeah, I
Sorry.
did actually. Just
Yvonne.
a quick question, Chris. Obviously, you'd be looking for halls which have enough car parking space, preferably over those that don't.
Yeah, obviously it needs to be accessible, but I think what we I think it is recognised that certain locations may not be perfect, but at least will be local and potentially within walking distance. So I think what we would do is perhaps just receive any nominations at the moment, and then we'll just consider them. Ideally, the more accessible they are, so you know, on with sufficient car parking, easy walking distance from population centres would be ideal.
Okay, thank you.
And disability access, I would have thought as well, Chris.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Most of the facilities we have should have that anyway. I think it's Katrina got a hand up.
Sure. Katrina, did you want to say something?
Yes, Chris, obviously it may well be done at weekends. Will schools be open for this? Would you ask schools to open so they could be used? I know there'd be a cleansing problem, but I wondered if it was a possibility to use a school hall at weekends.
Very possibly. I think a similar exercise is being undertaken with county, who are obviously the educational authority and would have some of the oversight in relation to educational facilities. But I think if they could avoid using schools, they probably would choose to do so, because the vaccination centres will probably want to be open 7 days a week. It's a bit difficult at the moment to actually know what the actual need for them will be, because we don't even know on volumes of vaccines that are going to be made available nationally. But we're just really just trying to get ready in case we get notified that we need a facility in this location for this period of time.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. A good point, Katrina. I think with that, unless anybody has anything to say, I declare the meeting closed, and thank you for your attendance, and good night. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Just in time, my battery's about to go. Bye. Good night.